Hello and welcome to the Weather Quarter. I'm Jenny Woodward. This time we're talking to some educational and inspiring Australians, and we'll get to them shortly. But first, a look at the weather that's been making the news. We're starting in Japan, the country already devastated by a terrible tsunami, which has suffered once again at the hands of Mother Nature. Lives were lost again after a powerful typhoon crossed the coast. Rivers, already swollen by heavy rains ahead of the typhoon, forced the closure of major transport corridors. It was a very powerful system, with winds close to 150 kilometres an hour and torrential rain. More than 1 million people were told to move to higher ground. Closer to home, in the top end, the Weather Bureau has cautioned that the wet season there will be, as expected, wet and hot. In fact, very wet and extremely hot. That's the prediction for this summer. The Bureau predicts a 75% chance of above average rainfall, but says it's probably not going to flood like last wet season.
Last year we broke several records. It was a huge wet season, and a few reasons for that, one of which was a very strong La Nina. We're not seeing signals for a strong La Nina, at least nothing to repeat last year.
Temperatures are expected to be up in the top end, but should be fairly stable in central Australia.
Especially coming out of a very cool dry season, it's going to feel much warmer than we're used to.
And recent rains in Western Australia are responsible for a turnaround in the predictions for Australia's winter grain crops. The good news comes from ABARES, the agricultural forecaster, which says Australia's winter grain crops will be better than expected, the fourth highest on record. That's for wheat, barley, oats and canola. And the West gets the credit for it.
They produce up to 40% of the Australian crop, so any big changes in WA has quite big impact on the big picture of Australia.
Now to a story about a cookbook. And you might be wondering why it's on this program, but bear with me, the proof is in the pudding, as they say. At the height of Queensland's flood disaster, ABC Local Radio, in its role as emergency broadcaster, played a major part informing residents about the terrible weather conditions. When the floodwaters subsided, Madonna King's Mornings program recognised that giving and sharing of food helped to heal and rebuild community spirit. So the program called for recipes and was overwhelmed. The result is a fabulous cookbook called A Generous Helping. I caught up with one of the recipe donors and food consultant and co-editor, Alison Alexander. Alison, what is it about food that brings people together?
I think food's a great connector of people. I think that it connects community, it connects family. It's also a way of showing that you care for people by, taking a nice something that you've made.
And Shirley, why did you decide to offer a recipe for the cookbook?
Well, when I heard Madonna King ask on the radio this morning that she wanted more recipes and preferably a recipe with a story attached, I'd just baked a cake to send to my son who's over in the Middle East, and I thought there is a story attached to that, so I sent her the recipe.
And did you get many recipes, Alison?
We got hundreds and hundreds. They really did come in a huge quantity, and they had to be narrowed down to 150 for the book. And this is one of the recipes that absolutely had to go in the book. It's got a great story and it's a really lovely cake.
Well, Shirley, it looks like we've got plenty of ingredients here, so I think we should start to cook this cake.
So first of all, we take 500 grams of mixed fruit, place that in the saucepan.
And do you need to chop the fruit at all?
No, just as is. And then we have 200
So tell me the story behind the cake itself.
My mother-in-law gave me this recipe. I don't know where it originated. I think it came down probably from her mother, and I baked the cake, you know, it's a family favourite. And when Gordon went to Vietnam in 1968, I used to bake the cake and send it over to him.
And that was your husband?
That's my husband, I'm sorry, yes. And then many years later, my eldest son Stuart, who's also in the army, he was over in Iraq, so I used to send him cakes during the time he was over there.
And does the cake travel well?
It travels perfectly, actually. It takes almost a month to get across to Sinai to Stuart, and he says that it's still moist when it arrives, but it doesn't last very long.
Are there any tricks to the recipe?
Not really. It is just a perfectly simple recipe. If I ever add a little alcohol, I add less water. Instead of the cup of water, just make it a little less and put a little sloosh of alcohol in. But I don't do that sending the cake over to Stuart at this stage, not while he's in the Middle East.
Do you have a vast store of recipes?
I've got a number of recipe books, and I've got an old recipe book that I've been putting together that's about yay thick. But no, I don't have a huge collection.
Why did you choose this one?
I think basically because it is such a family favourite. It's so quick to bake, it's a very simple recipe, and it is delicious.
Alison, ABC Radio played a great role in getting all the flood messages out to the community, but how did a cookbook come from this?
I think it was just in the days following the flood and hearing stories of people who'd, lost so much, including their cookbooks, and that struck a chord with me. And I thought, look, there's got to be something we can do to replenish those supplies of recipes that they had. And I think that there's really favourite recipes that we all have. And so that's what we really asked people to donate was, what's your favourite recipe that you would give to somebody when they're in need? What would you take to them? What would you bake for them? Those sorts of things. And that's what we ended up with in the book.
I know there's a great connection between food and the weather, and probably you understand that more than most people as you're married to a meteorologist. But why do you think that's so?
Comfort food is a term that we use a lot with food now. And it's generally those things that we grew up with that are often heavier dishes that we associate with winter. So it might be a good steak and kidney pudding or a shepherd's pie, things like that. But I think also, we talk about weather and we talk about food in connect with each other. Well, then lovely light summery salads, taking advantage of what's in season is very much connected with the weather and with what we're eating at the time.
Does it look good?
Oh, yes. Look at that.
Oh, yes.
Oh, smell that.
It smells delicious. Is it ready, Alison?
Oh, I think it's perfect.
Excellent. The Victorian Department of Primary Industries has come up with an innovative way to teach us all about the weather. They've put together a cartoon-style series. It's cute, but very informative, so there's a chance other states may follow their lead. The ABC's Landline team caught up with the developers.
Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out? Who let the dogs out?
The Climate Dogs story really came out of our extension program. We've been doing a lot of talks with farmers across Victoria, over 600 presentations in the last 3 years, and farmers are fascinated with what's happening with their weather patterns.
This is Enzo, Indy, Ridgie and Sam. They represent 4 climate processes that affect our rainfall variability across Victoria.
These 4 climate drivers are a bit like sheepdogs. The farmer's moving a mob of sheep along the road. If all of the dogs do their job and just do what they're normally doing, then it can be quite a peaceful job just moving the sheep along.
But they don't always work the way we'd like them to.
But if 2 or 3 of the dogs start playing up, then it can really give you a troublesome afternoon.
Effectively chasing rainfall away from Victoria. While we can't control what these dogs are up to, the Bureau of Meteorology and the Victorian Department of Primary Industries have new and valuable tools that can assist farmers in keeping track of these climate dogs.
The Bureau of Meteorology had some great science to explain, these 4 key drivers of Victoria's weather, and that Victoria's at the crossroads of these 4 climate drivers.
This is the Indian Ocean Dipole, also known as Indy. He influences Victoria's rainfall in winter and spring.
We tend to use it in our sessions with farmers where we call them upscaling sessions, where we'll go into a local district and we'll look at the last 100 years of rainfall records and discuss how there's been wet years and dry years right throughout that century of farming. And really then drawing into these particular 4 drivers have always been a part of our wet seasons and dry seasons. So understanding them is really important.
Historically, Indy has been a significant source of rain. However, in recent years, Indy has not been chasing moisture down south as often as farmers would like, reducing the average rainfall for Victoria.
Farmers really like it because farmers know their seasons vary a lot from one year to the next. And when they understand how there's moisture coming from either the Pacific Ocean or from the Indian Ocean, or it's about, the pattern of the cold fronts down south, when they understand there's a climate driver behind it, it really makes a lot of sense to farmers.
Keeping an eye on Indy's behaviour can provide an indication of the expected rainfall coming from the northwest to Victoria.
We often get the comment that they're saying, this is actually explained in a way that we really understand. And it leads on to then, looking at, well, OK, we accept these climate drivers affect our local district. What are they up to this spring?
During La Nina, ENSO chases greater amounts of moist tropical air across Australia. During El Nino, ENSO changes his mind and drives warm, moist air towards South America instead. El Nino years have often resulted in drier winter and spring periods for Victoria.
This is a version that works well for different parts of Victoria. The New South Wales DPI are looking at modifying a version for telling the climate story for their part of the world. But each region across the country has its own particular story about what are the key drivers of seasonal variability and how they influence local weather and seasons, and also just looking at how some of them might be, behaving a bit differently over recent decades.
And that's the Weather Quarter for this time. You can contact us at weatherquarter@your.abc.net.au, or you can find me on Twitter, Jenny Weather. Until next time, I'm Jenny Woodward. Bye for now.